Hi everyone, this is Anusha, first episode of Real Talks with Anusha, where we're untangling labels one conversation at a time. For today's podcast, we have someone very, very special, Dr. Severine Minot, who is assistant professor, School of Humanities and Social Sciences at Al University. Please correct me if I did pronounce that wrong. But she is someone I look up to. I am right now working in the criminal legal policy. It has actually been inspired the work that I have done with her and under her. So all the thesis work that we've been able to do, all the work that we've been able to do in Pakistan, I think that served such a huge role in my life in shaping where I am today. So a lot of credit goes to her, and I'm really, really grateful that she agreed to do this podcast in her busy time. So thank you so much, Dr. Severin. Thank you for having thank you for being here today. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. I'm so proud of your journey, and I'm also honored to be here, to be your first guest.
Also, for today's topic, the topic is the kid is getting out of her hands. What does it really mean? So we talk a lot about at risk. We talk a lot about being disruptive. We talk a lot about labeling, and we want to dig into this a bit deeper, especially with the interest of in juvenile justice system. I wanted to understand a bit more about, like, we throw about these terms of, hey, the person is at risk, but what does it really mean? So we have some questions. It's going to be a bit more of a conversation based, just picking, just taking insightful conversations and understanding, also probably from a theoretical lens, or also connecting the bridge with what is happening right now in the world and understanding what does it really mean in terms of the kid is getting out of her hands. So let's get started with our first question for today. So as I just mentioned a bit earlier, that we talk about this term called youth at risk. We throw around this term at risk, but what does it really mean to be at risk?
Sure. So at risk sort of emerged out of the discourse on dropouts, right? School dropouts. So children that were first labeled at risk were those who were, at risk of dropping out. So those who had or being expelled, for example, right? Like the idea of facing challenges that impede the completion of, primary and secondary education. And this obviously is linked to the juvenile justice system, because at-risk youth are also very often, not always, but very often, they become involved in the judicial system at a young age, right? So they may get arrested for shoplifting. They may get arrested for, assault or some violent episodes, hitting people and things like that. And so, antisocial behavior can be labeled as one of the factors of at risk, right? And so I started a long time ago working with McDonald Youth Foundation in Winnipeg, Canada, working with kids and youth, teenagers that were going through the judicial system. And, part of the factors or part of the environment that, in which they were living, it wasn't just them being not successful at school or something like that. There were often a lot of connections with their home environment, or the kind of peer groups that they would hang out with. So I think that being at risk obviously has multiple implications or many facets. We're looking at, for example, the types of response to parental control. So a kid that may run away, for example, could also be seen as at risk, right? At risk now, because the term expanded not only, to refer to school and dropping out from school, but also at risk of becoming involved in the legal system and in crime or criminality. So it stems from the educational sector, but now it has expanded to social work and obviously justice. So I hope that answers your question.
It did. And I have a quick follow-up to that. So let's say I know that it started from like being dropped out, but what if someone is still in school? They're performing in school, but the home environment is unstable. They have let's say dubious peer network, which are involved in probably criminal activities, which have not been and they've not been, some of them may have been arrested or convicted for, but their peer network is unreliable, they have unstable home environment, but they're still in school. Would that be considered at risk?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And this is actually a little bit similar to my own experience. I always did well in school, but I grew up in, it was after a divorce, and my parental situation with my mom's house, my dad's house, having to move from one to the other. I wasn't adapting well. I started, incursions or exploration with illegal drugs and smoking and things like that at a really young age, which meant that I wasn't integrating properly. I was being influenced by others who, try this. And I was it's only later, with a lot of work in with a psychologist and a counselor, that I realized I was sort of responding to anger, very deep anger issues in me. And I was sort of trying to numb that, or trying to distract from actually, holding the pain and working with it and becoming productive. So I think that it's not because a student does relatively well or even very well in school that they're not necessarily at risk. And symptoms or let's say like behaviors that could be characterized by at risk, even though you're doing well in school, could be running away, which I did, incursions or explorations with illegal substances and drugs and alcohol, and smoking, things like that, which now things are changing in the landscape of cannabis, for example. It's being legalized everywhere, but back in the day it was seen as a gateway drugs to harder drugs, and that's actually how it worked for me as well. So I turned my life around very young. I was 16 years old when I decided I wanted to quit all that, which is something that most youth usually go through later on. Like, problematic behavior usually emerges a little bit later compared to my life experience. But I think that we have to be aware of, we have to be aware that these behaviors are happening outside of school. They're happening at home. They're happening in terms of behaviors in public, and so it very at a very young age, I had a relationship with the police and social workers. But I think the difference in many, the difference for me is that I had parents who were very supportive, and they wanted to help me, instead of being super angry at me. They just wanted to get to the bottom of my needs. Yeah. And so, that's why I ended up, not completely dropping out and not, leading a life of crime. I turned my life around early and decided that I would go to university and help society. And I got, as I said, I got involved with NGOs. I worked with female ex-offenders coming out of prison. I worked with youth, going through the justice system. So I think that becoming a helper was really, fundamental in reframing my own identity. I wasn't always the problem kid. I could be the helpful kid, So discovering that at a young age was really important for me. Yeah. So in my late teens, this is when I started working with youth, but I already had the experience of having gone through trouble and pulling myself out of that trouble and making better choices for myself. So, but it was a struggle, honestly. I mean, it took me 3 different tries at 1 or 2 years interval to really get out of all my bad habits and bad behaviors. And I say bad behavior, I hate to say good versus bad, but bad behavior in terms of my own life choices and how they were impacting my life, and even potentially compromising my future, right? Because if you're still a teen at 18 and 19, because those are teen years, but now you're an adult legally. And if you end up with a criminal record, that will stop. That will stop you from many opportunities, from accessing many opportunities in life, even jobs that you want or opportunities to travel. So I understood that when I was 16, right? I need to get my life together before I'm 18 so that I can, not be, not do this to myself and my own, life opportunities. So I think civic education is really important. Kids don't always realize, the importance of civic education, and this is understanding how the law works and understanding the impact of having a criminal record after the age of majority, right?
I think it's also I've come across cases where those who are minors and are involved with the system, they also don't know that they don't have to disclose their information because the information that their records are sealed at this point. But also having that information is very much lacking for those who also have the rights. And I agree with that part that it's unfortunate. I think it's a very systemic problem that exists, that even after 18, if you were with the system, like there are a lot of opportunities, there's a lot of discrimination, legal discrimination that would happen, that would prevent you from voting, that would prevent you from getting public housing, that would prevent you from getting public aid, and all of those things, just because you have
even international travel. Like if you dream of, seeing the world, if you have a criminal record, and after the age of majority, you can't, in many places, I mean, with a Canadian passport, usually they don't ask, if in order to get a visa, they don't ask if you have a criminal record, but in other places they do. And that stops you from going. Yeah. I mean, someone with a criminal record in Canada, for example, can't even go to the US. So those are important, really important factors.
That's true. That's true. And from what I'm hearing, it's not just if the person is doing very well in school, that does not mean that they're not at risk if there are other factors to it. So probably they're going through trauma. They are going through certain mental health issues which have been unaddressed. They have a certain kind of peer group that has been unrecognized. So there are other factors that's going on. Just because a person, a student may be performing exceptionally well or great on average, does not mean that there is nothing underlying beneath it. And I think
Absolutely.
that's unrecognized.
Yeah, to add to that, I think I hate to have I mean, I'm also just for context, I'm an ex-policy analyst that used to work for the government of Canada, and a lot of policies are, blanket policies that are supposed to be applied to everyone in the same way. And I think that, with regards to youth experience, there's a lot of case-by-case basis. And I think that in my case, the reason why I did well in school is that it was also conditional to my freedom. So my parents would give me more freedom, the freedom to go out late at night. And, my parents were not authoritative parents that gave me a lot of structure. But the condition is, as long as you do well in school, you can do whatever, like you can, so I could go out late at night. I could hang out with whoever I wanted. I had very little supervision, but it was that trade-off, right? I got to do well in school, and I had the mental capacity for it. And it also, I have ADHD. I have a late diagnosis ADHD. And I realized that at the time I wasn't diagnosed ADHD, and they would have probably medicated me back then. It was like everybody jumping on the Ritalin train. But because I wasn't diagnosed, I had behavioral issues even in school, but because I was performing well and I was a smart kid, I wasn't labeled as a problem kid as much as others who were struggling with their grades, even though I wasn't necessarily, I wasn't on my best behavior even in school. I sort of, people let it go
because of the grades.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I
right.
think there's a lot of onus that we place on the grades, that if the grades are great, I think one's self-worth or worth itself is based on like their grades. If grades are great, then there's no other problem that exists with the kid. I think that's a fundamental mindset that needs to be questioned in general, that there could be a lot of different things. I know a lot of outstanding outperformers in school. I know in college, in university. I've known a lot of like outperformers, but they're struggling with a lot of different things that goes unrecognized because people start thinking like, you're such a good kid. Like
Yeah, but
we're
we're really good at
but
hiding our
that's what we're
deviant.
good at. We're good at
Yeah,
hiding it.
like you could have a young kid who is doing great in school, but as soon as school is over, they go in an alley and they go smoke a joint and they get high for the rest of the evening. There's something else at work, but you don't see that. They're hiding it. Nobody sees it, right? And they are, and we become really good also at sort of pushing it down and not talking. No, there's nothing wrong. And I think that the personal, like the work that needs to be done to really sort of investigate, why am I doing this? Why is it turning into a
Yeah.
compulsive? Why is my delinquent or deviant behavior turning into a compulsive behavior? Like what's going on? I think that only comes later, or if we have mentors and parents that really help us do the work, right? And I think it's hard to be honest. I think that's for honest to ourselves and honest with others. I think that's really hard. We know, I've worked with people who struggle with alcoholism at a very young age, and they don't admit to themselves or to others that they have a problem, right? Like that, nah, it's just
No,
cool or
it's
whatever. Like
guy.
don't worry about it. It's none of your business, but I think that the youth themselves and the people around them, are just not there in that space of honesty and going, yeah, maybe it is a problem and I need to learn to tell myself no. Even for a cigarette, for example, right? Like people who smoke, they're like, I'm having a stressful day, I'm going to have a cigarette. Okay, well, that's turning into a compulsive behavior. That's a response to us, to stressors. Are you still able to take control of yourself in that moment and tell yourself no? And that ability, if you can develop it at a young age, might actually be a lifesaver later on, because under peer pressure you can say no. Under your own life experience, stressors or whatever, like triggers, you can say no to yourself and say, no, I'm going to go for a run instead, or I'm going to go to
Yeah.
the gym, or I'm going to put happy music and dance and sing, instead of getting drunk, or instead of doing drugs. So I think that behavior and that self-discipline to tell yourself no is something that I only developed like in my late teens, early 20s, after multiple attempts of trying to get clean and trying to, like get my life together. But I think that should be taught earlier in life.
That makes
It's not just a no from the parents or a no from the legal system. This is illegal, therefore you can't do it. Like it's the ability to tell yourself no. Because
self-navigation. Like, how do
yeah,
you have that inner compass telling you, like, hey, this is not what for me?
yeah, yeah.
Knowing I think it's also to do with instant gratification, that we want that instantly.
But
And
singing and dancing is instant gratification. You just have
that's
to
it.
pick your poison, right? Like
Yes.
pick your, everybody's got compensation, mechanism. For some people, it's just going for a nap. I'm gonna sleep it off. That's a healthier and non-disruptive, right?
That's true.
And
That's true.
I have to say also, it's not all or nothing, because when I was a teen, I did both. So I did have consumption problems, but I also, the only thing that could save me and my mood and my focus when I couldn't go get high was my Walkman. Back in the day, we had cassette
Yeah.
tapes with batteries, AA batteries. So I had my Walkman and my headphones, and I would go into a quiet place at school and I would just sing and dance. And that was also something that helped me. I always say music saved my life a million times.
Because
you
you were
know
able to regulate your emotions to a different way, which is non-disruptive, so to speak. Uh,
yeah. Well, instead, it was like when I started doing that, I was already in my fourth high school. I changed high
yeah.
schools a lot, and I knew that it was the crunch. Like I gotta get this done. I gotta finish my high school now, because the year before was a complete write-off. And so I was trying to do 2 years in one. I was like, and so I knew that I couldn't just skip school and go get high. I needed to be at school, finish the classes, finish all my homework. And if I needed a break, especially with my ADHD and lack of focus, and I would literally go to a corner, dance for 20 minutes and come back to the job. And I was lucky enough in that school to have teachers that sort of understood and really wanted to help me finish. So I think, again, the idea that people are supportive around you, even though, like I said, I wasn't diagnosed back then, but now that behavior makes sense to me, that now that I know what I had, I understand why I was a doodler in my classes, why my notes were all over the place, and why I could, hyper focus on a textbook, read it in a couple of days, and then not want to do the class anymore because I already read the book. So I had certain abilities, or learning abilities and
Yeah.
learning disabilities, that I learned to manage, and that had to do with the fact that my parents sort of gave me the freedom against the grades, right? So I knew that I needed the grades at a younger age, and then later on, by the time I was in that school, I should give context also. By the time I was in that high school, the fourth high school where I went, I was already legally emancipated. I was living on my own,
Mm.
with social
Yeah.
work, sort of like social workers sort of like accompanying me in that. So the Canadian system allows for a 16-year-old to legally emancipate from their
Yeah.
parents. My parents supported that, so it wasn't a conflictual situation. My parents knew that I needed my freedom and to grow up sort of faster than they were ready to let me go, but that was what I needed. And so, the self-discipline came more when I was on my own and I had to do this for me. It wasn't someone else telling me this.
That's very interesting because I don't see that often, like the self-discipline coming up emerging at a very young age. And I think it's the strongest when it comes from within, that you
Yeah,
decide.
but it
that-
came
that-
it came out of necessity, a sense of necessity. I can't drag on my high school any longer. I need to catch up my past year and do this year in 1 year. Like, that was a decision that I made. And so after that, the discipline kicked in,
that
right?
makes
And the self-awareness, and it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't an easy ride at all. It took multiple efforts. And that's part, when we talk about at risks, we see this with youth who have high incidences of recidivism, right? Like, it's hard to change habits, and
Yeah.
it's hard to change your friend group. When I emancipated at 16 years old, it was for that. I told my parents I need to move to a different city so that I don't continue to be friends with these groups of friends, because if I continue to be friends with these people, I will die. I told this to my parents. I said, you need to allow me to leave this city in order to go and study and live by myself in another smaller city
Yeah.
where I don't know all these delinquents, And so I was at 16, this process started when I was 15 years old, but at 15 years old, I was already aware that my life was in danger if I continued to hang out with these very dangerous people. They were not my age. They were older. They were,
Okay.
biker gangs. They were they were dangerous people. And so having that presence of mind of thinking, like, what do I need so that I stop this cycle, this downward cycle.
The
And
drama
as I
spiral.
said, I did run into problems with the law, and my social worker, was there always sort of, advising me on the next steps.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think at risk is, this idea of at risk is like someone who tends to be in a pattern of deviance, or criminal deviance. Not necessarily criminal, it could be just like again, running away, or not, or disobeying parental authority, and here I'm talking about reasonable
Yeah.
parental authority, not the kind of parental authority that is so toxic that makes
Yeah.
you really go like, I can't stay here. Yeah.
Because
So
that's a problem in itself.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are household and parental environments that are really toxic for some children, and when you, but it wasn't like that for me. The divorce had something to do, but my parents never told me I had no future. My parents never told me I was a loser. My parents never told me. They always said you have so much potential, and so that idea was sort of ingrained in me, that I have potential. I just need to put myself in circumstances that are going to allow me to develop that potential.
That's such
So
a great segue to the next question.